This is the Ethanol Report, the industry podcast from the Renewable Fuels Association since 2008. I'm Cindy Zimmerman. Researchers have been studying the carcinogenic effects of compounds originating from burning fossil fuels through the Biofuels Research Project, which is supported by more than a dozen different biofuels groups, including the Renewable Fuels Association. Now, new research out of the Hormel Institute at the University of Minnesota has discovered links between breast cancer risk and exposure to carcinogens and aromatics from gasoline, a discovery that could provide opportunities for safer alternatives such as ethanol to replace them. Dr. Lena Hilkiva-Clark is the author of a paper on her research entitled Aromatics from Fossil Fuels and Breast Cancer, and I reached out to her, as well as biofuels researcher and economist Stefan Mueller and Gail Dennison with the Hormel Institute to learn more about the research and its significance. First of all, what I'd like you all to do is introduce yourself for me and tell me what you do. Stefan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, my name is Stefan Mueller, principal economist at the University of Illinois at Chicago Energy Resources Center. And I do work in the area of life cycle emissions modeling, clean fuels modeling, and sustainability certification of biofuels.
Yes, well known in the ethanol industry, biofuels industry. You've done a lot of research over the years with them. Lena, how about you next?
Yeah, so Lena Hilkiva-Clark. I was previously at Georgetown University, where I was a professor of oncology for many years, and now I have been at the University of Minnesota and the Hormel Institute, where I am professor of food science and nutrition, and I have been studying breast cancer for many, many years.
And Gail.
All right, Gail Dennison, Director of Development and External Relations for the Hormel Institute and project manager for the Biofuels Research Project that we've done for quite a few years now at the Hormel Institute.
So this paper that was just released entitled Aromatics from Fossil Fuels and Breast Cancer. Who would like to lead off with talking about this particular study and how long you've been working on it?
So I can probably start because it's it's the area of my biggest interest in research. So breast cancer and what is causing it in women. We know breast cancer affects every 8 women during their lifetime. And the incidence just keeps going up and up, particularly amongst young women under 50. And we have no idea what's causing it. People think, oh, it's inherited, but inherited breast cancer just affects 10% of all the newly diagnosed breast cancers. And I have been doing mostly studies with animal models, where we use these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. We give it to animals and they develop breast cancer or mammary tumors. In humans, it has been looked as an association. Women who have been exposed to highest levels of these PAHs seem to be at the highest risk of getting breast cancer. But it's just like an association. You can't expose a woman to PAHs and wait till they develop breast cancer. But what this research shows that it is during a certain time window when the exposure is most damaging, and that is between the puberty onset and the birth of the first child, when the breast is most sensitive for these exposures. And then it just takes almost 30 years before the breast cancer actually is diagnosed. It just slowly cooks there. But another thing that people don't think very much about is that not everybody who is exposed to carcinogens will develop breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, whatever. You have to have this susceptibility to develop the cancer. And so familial breast cancers, you have the susceptibility because you inherit certain mutations that make you be at higher risk, much, much higher risk. So for these sporadic breast cancers that are not linked to any specific inherited mutations, something happens early in life that makes you much more susceptible for these carcinogens. So I have been studying some endocrine disrupting chemicals, mostly estrogenic chemicals, diet, like maternal obesity. And one of the things that we will now be studying is whether these aromatics, which PTEX compounds, if a pregnant woman is exposed to them, her daughter now will be at increased risk of later on getting breast cancer, and that breast cancer being caused by the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that we are exposed from, for example, vehicle emissions. So the link between PTEX and cancers, it's still like a people have shown that if you expose to PTEX compounds early in life, you increase inflammation, and inflammation is a risk factor for cancer. But nobody has yet looked the direct link, and that's what we are going to do.
And how are you going to do that?
So we will use an animal model where we will expose pregnant mouse dams through inhalation to the PTEX compounds at the levels, different dose exposure levels that are humans are exposed to, little, higher, or very high levels. And then the exposure occurs only during pregnancy, and then when the pups are born and they are adults, and when they are most susceptible for the carcinogen-induced breast cancer, we give them polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon and see if the ones that were also exposed to PTEX compounds in the womb are most susceptible for the carcinogen to induce breast cancer. So it would mean that society should make an effort to try to limit the exposure to PTEX compounds, particularly for pregnant women.
Gail, what is the interest in this research as on the part of the Biofuels Research Project? Why is this something important for this project to study?
The answer to that is that about 14 to 16 different funders came together wanting to look at the links between these aromatics and initiation of cancer. And the reason being that the industry-sided look at this is these compounds, these aromatics, could be replaced by ethanol. So in southern Minnesota, we're surrounded by cornfields. One of the largest ethanol companies is right, probably 20 miles from us, Absolute Energy. And the CEO of that company was aware of the Hormel Institute's cancer research, very interested in Dr. Lena Hillakivi-Clark's preventive, epigenetic, what are environmental concerns that could initiate cancer. And he early on saw those links and brought in Stefan Mueller, Dr. Stefan Mueller, who's with us today. And so we have been for these past few years now looking at what are, is there carcinogenesis caused by these environmental factors? And could it be, then the next step would be, after more research, could these compounds be replaced by ethanol? So it's win-win. That is their long-range look at why is this research important.
Stefan, why don't you explain what aromatics actually are. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that most people don't understand that. They think you have gasoline, you have ethanol, whatever, but they don't understand the things that are in gasoline.
Yeah. And so gasoline and aviation fuels, they're basically a soup of hydrocarbons, right? There's about over 200 different hydrocarbons make up gasoline, aviation fuel, petroleum-based fuels. A subclass of that are aromatics. And aromatics are sort of added or produced as part of the refining process, and they're very valuable because they add octane to a fuel. And octane is needed in an engine to prevent, let's say, premature combustion. So the more octane you have, the higher the octane number of a fuel, right? The higher you can have what's called the compression ratio in an engine and make an engine more efficient. So aromatics are a good source of what's called octane to prevent an engine from prematurely combusting, to run more smoothly, right, and be more efficient. Now, ethanol has also a very high octane number and can quite easily replace these aromatics. And yes, by us showing that aromatics are quite carcinogenic, ethanol is a better alternative. One of the aromatics is benzene, which is already recognized as being carcinogenic by the US EPA and regulated. So we are just like now looking really at other aromatics that are added in large quantities to transportation fuels. And investigating, whether they are equally as carcinogenic as maybe benzene. And so that's what the research aims at. There's another little wrinkle into that, additional information into that. It's not really just liquid transportation fuels. You are also emitting aromatics from electric power plants that use fossil fuels. And as we know, natural gas-fired power plants in the Midwest, we still have a lot of coal-fired power plants and oil-fired peaking power plants. They all emit aromatic hydrocarbons as part of their, combustion process. So just thinking of it in terms of gasoline, sustainable aviation fuels, also our electricity generation, and the electricity that goes into electric vehicles ultimately emits aromatics. And so that's what we're going at. Are we underestimating the carcinogenity of these aromatic hydrocarbons? And that's what Professor Hilakivi Clark researches as part of this project. My role is then to sort of frame it into what does it mean for our everyday fuel use, energy use as a society.
Well, have these aromatics always been a part of gasoline? And didn't ethanol already replace one type of octane enhancer that was found to be a carcinogen?
We used MTBE as an oxygenate before it was substituted with ethanol as a cleaner oxygenate. But in this case, we're looking really at the octane number, right? And in the past, again, the octane is provided by aromatics, aromatic hydrocarbons, benzene, toluene, xylene, ethyl benzene, all of which can be substituted successfully with ethanol. And to answer your question, yes, aromatics have always been part of the gasoline because they're so valuable for an engine to run smoothly and efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
But now, again, we are looking into, similar to how we replaced MTBE because it was bad for the water, right? Now we're looking at what can we do to do the next step and further clean up our fuels with aromatics substitution. And I'll let Lena answer the carcinogenic question.
So we know as I said, breast cancer incidence goes up and up. We can't really think that there's only one cause. Like, we can't say that because more and more gasoline is being used, that's why there's a higher risk. So it's a combination of this carcinogenic exposure and the susceptibility to the carcinogenic exposure. So we kind of need to look at it in a bigger picture. But if we can eliminate one aspect of what's making women more vulnerable to get breast cancer, that should be our goal.
Well, where do you already said what you're going to do next, but as far as this research is concerned, how vital do you think it is in this going forward to help address that problem?
In cancer research, the investigators are mostly focusing on what to do once the cancer is being diagnosed. And the treatments have got better, but the proportion of women who die of breast cancer goes also up all the time, just because I think perhaps it went down a little bit more recently because of the more effective treatments. But it's still like every 13 minutes a woman dies of breast cancer. And so we really need to start putting more emphasis on trying to prevent it, to reduce it, the burden of breast cancer in women.
Well, Stefan, you mentioned that one part of your role is, seeing how ethanol can replace some of these aromatics. How easy would it be? Because isn't gasoline different in different, these aromatics are added in different concentrations in the country. It's reformulated gasoline is different than regular gasoline. So how would you go about having to replace some of these aromatics if you find they are carcinogenic?
So currently in gasoline, we have about 20% aromatics, right? Dominated by benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. And again, they can be fairly easily substituted, let's say, with higher ethanol blends. We already have E10 in our fuels. We need to go to E15 and possibly E20, E25. So a higher ethanol blend in our gasoline, right? And that's fairly easily possible. Aromatics can also be used, as chemicals and sold otherwise. Refineries can pretty easily add ethanol to the fuel, right? They just produce a feedstock without the aromatics and then add ethanol in to get that octane number to where it needs to be, right? Where it was with the aromatics. And ethanol can bring that octane number back up. And that's fairly easy to do. I do want to mention, right? I do think liquid transportation fuels are gonna be around for a long time. Yes, we have electric vehicle alternatives, but we also we need a portfolio of technologies, right? I want to mention we do need gasoline, in my opinion. We do need petroleum-based fuels, but we can make them cleaner with ethanol going forward. And that's the key, right? And we also have to watch what our electric power plants use, right? And again, we can produce cleaner fuels, clean up our current fossil fuel mix by adding biofuels to them and ensure that we have a portfolio of fuel streams going forward.
Right, that's what I was going to ask, because you had mentioned that aviation fuel, as well as factory emissions of places that use fossil fuels, also have these aromatics in them, and so they're all part of the mix. Well, so Gail, maybe you can answer this, maybe not, but I'm just wondering how changes like this, like replacing certain aromatics in gasoline, how does that get implemented? Is it regulatory or legislative, or does the industry just decide for itself, or would it be a state-by-state thing, or would it be nationwide? I mean, how does that happen?
And again, our role at the Hormel Institute, and when we started these projects, just to kind of set the stage, is we did not know if in studying these aromatics, these compounds, if indeed the research would show, are they carcinogenic? Does it look like these compounds, either isolated or together, initiate cancer? So we were very clear because, we're a pure basic research center with these 14 different funders that range from U.S. Grains Council to National Corn Growers Association and many, many others that that were interested in our discoveries. We did not know when we started, are these compounds looking like they are going to be carcinogenic? What Dr. Lena Hilakivi Clark's research did show is yes, they do. But back to your question about what's next. So now that we have initiated this second part of the study that will further look at the compounds, the industry will take what we find and they will then take it to the next steps, which mean how are we going to introduce it to society? How are we going to introduce it to regulatory bodies? That's really their role. They've done it before, with a regulated compound. Stefan, that's benzene. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And regulations are one option, right? But not always the best option, right? There's other, incentive structures that could be employed to increase, ethanol blends into gasoline. Again, this is a little bit, as Gail pointed out, that's a little bit outside our research, right? We are researchers, right? We point out, Dr. Hilly Clark points out, it does the fundamental research on cancer. I point out what it should mean to clean up our fuels and ensure that we have both liquid fuels and other fuel options in the future. What the next steps are to get the blends up, to get more ethanol into substituted into our energy streams. That's not necessarily our primary knowledge base.
Right. Yep. And I really want to emphasize that because, like I shared, we weren't sure if this research that is done was going to be of possible interest or benefit to anyone that might be in the ethanol industry, but they were just wanting to find out, and so they did fund this research, but it's not directed research. We could have found out information that was of no benefit to them whatsoever. And so now it's really up to them. By them, I mean everybody in the renewable fuels, industry and beyond, what they will do with this. And this is, some research has already been done and out there, but more will have to be done before it just goes from this to, any kind of regulation. It'll go forward in stages.
Right.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that we really want to find the truth, and we have a research question and we want to find an answer to it. And that is by no way driven by where the research question is driven, where the money is coming from, but the result is what the research shows.
That's right.
Right. What about other types of cancer? You're focusing on breast cancer. There's, a lot of other types. Is there any other types of cancer you're looking at?
Right now, we have another project that's about to commence, and Lena, perhaps you could talk on that, but Dr. Luke Hepner at the Hormel Institute will be beginning a lung cancer study, also based on these compounds.
So what cancers we are looking at is where our expertise is. So one could also, for example, look in terms of prostate cancer, because prostate cancer is the most common or second most common cancer in men after lung cancer. And oftentimes what is making women to get breast cancer seems to also be the factor in men getting prostate cancer.
All right. Well, that is all the questions I have. Who would like to wrap us up or provide any other information I didn't ask about?
Yeah, I want to really thank you for your interest and allowing us this opportunity to share our research further. We know with the rise of cancer and cancers in younger people that there are things in the environment, and whether just one or how they work together, that are making more people get cancer. And as Dr. Lena Hillakivi-Clark has shared, it's our role at the Hormel Institute as a cancer research center to look at what are these things and what can people be made aware of so that they can be more proactive in their health.
Well, thank you very much to Lena, Stefan, and Gail for your time and for all the work that you're doing at the Hormel Institute to make the world a better place. And that's it for this edition of the Ethanol Report, the official podcast of the Renewable Fuels Association. Thanks for listening.